I'm a sociologist by training. I'm going to take a moment in a second and give you a sense of what that means, how I think. What I'm going to try to do for you today, maybe to you, more appropriate this time of day, is give you a sense of how a sweep of one of my projects, which focuses on high-tech organizations and various sorts of supporting institutions, venture capital, law firms, universities, research hospitals, forge using strategic alliances, formal contractual relationships, regional networks that work more or less effectively for the kinds of things we want high-tech regional networks to work for, by which I mean firm-level rates of innovation, levels of firm generation and diversity of new firms, styles of innovation and focus on products, things like this. So I work on a fairly narrow band of innovative outcomes. High-tech manufacturing, very science-intensive, largely firms that get over the valley of death, right, to have products, to IPO, to go on and be these growth industries. So I need to give you that caveat before I dive in. What I'm going to do today is start by giving you a brief sense of how someone like me thinks about the kinds of problems we've been talking about today. And before I came here, I thought that that was going to be more different from how it seems you all think than it is, so we might be able to spin through some of this. I'm then going to start with what I take to be two key messages. Right? If you don't read my work, if you don't want to read my work, two messages for you to take away. I'm then going to double back and summarize for you three findings that I think support those two messages before I ask you all what you think. I give you what I think someone like you all, someone like this organization, might take away from what I do. I'd like to have a conversation about it. So, that's the plan. The way I think. At the risk of stereotyping, most regional economic development conversations in my neck of the woods are dominated by economists, who largely think about incentives, markets, efficiency, allocated problems. Sorry, but I'm probably not doing too much violence to it. Another group that thinks about these topics a lot, political scientists, interests, coalitions, the role of leadership, how we build agendas in order to get to institutions that we need, laws, basically. Psychologists are becoming more and more involved in questions of innovation and science policy, focusing on individual differences, cognitive biases, how people perceive things, how innovation actually happens at the level of Marvin and I sitting down and hashing out ideas. I don't do any of that. I'm a sociologist, and I'm a particular variety of sociologist, which means that I think primarily about organizations, right, formal structures designed to accomplish some goal and governed in order to accomplish that goal. Firms are just one form of organization. I think about networks, by which I mean concrete patterns of relationships among some set of entities, in this case, organizations, but also individuals, ideas, websites, in a lot of ways you can use this, right, that shape the possibilities for action of the things in them, and institutions, which I take to mean the formal and informal rules of the game that we play. So that's everything in my kind of world, from the idea that at an interpersonal level, when you meet somebody here, you shake hands right-handed. And if you walk into a business meeting and start trying to shake hands left-handed without having a cast on your right arm, people are going to look at you funny. You're going to pay, a penalty for flouting that institution. Those kinds of small norms for interaction are important. They're informal, they bubble up in communities. They're also the big top-down norms. We heard today in our roundtable a story about how extractive industries in Appalachia sustain the role that they have there, in part because of formal institutions like federal government subsidies that distort the market in such a fashion that it makes it hard for alternative organizations to come in. I'm going to tell you a story about what we call network anchors, or anchor tenants, and the ways that they change the flow of information through a network. And one of the key features of that is that some incumbent anchor tenants are bad, or at least hard to overcome, and they strangle efforts at new regional development. That's one challenge of this network. So that's me, that's how I think. What you're going to hear today is sort of, in the language I heard this morning, my academic tribe's take on what you might call an innovation ecosystem. Organizations working together under different rules of the game, more and less formal, to accomplish goals that meet both collective and individual organizational needs. There's competition as well as cooperation going on in most of the regions I studied. So, the messages. This is part of what I thought would be newer, but I don't think there are going to be many people who necessarily disagree with the kind of thing I'm going to say. So number one, I think that when we talk about regions, we need to be very clear that much, maybe even most, of the capacity of a region to innovate, to generate products, ideas, new capabilities, et cetera, stems not from individual organizations in isolation, but from relationships between them. That's point one. Point two, what those relationships mean for the individuals that are part of them and for the larger community depends intimately on the kinds of organizations they connect. Right? So when I say the network demography of high technology regions, what I mean is that the networks of regions work differently depending on the distribution of types of organizations in them. I'll show you what that means in a second. But hold those two ideas in mind because it suggests something very important for regional design. We have a tendency to think about straight capabilities, almost like a Noah's Ark view of regions. We need venture capital capacity, and we need some law firms, and we need a university that produces students who will stay around and has some faculty who can consult and do stuff, and we need X, Y, and Z. Right? We tend to think of that as a checklist when really it's a recipe. Right? The thing to know about a recipe is that the order in which you put things together matters. Right? And the ways in which things combine. Anybody who's ever tried to take an egg out of a waffle batter right, knows this. So, 2 messages, 3 findings. What I've done here is I've got the year of a paper that I'm summarizing for you here really briefly. The last slide of my presentation, which I'm happy to share, is a list of papers that I'm referring to. All of those are available on my personal website, which is on the front of this. So I'm going to give you the stratospheric version. I encourage you, if you're interested, to go look at more specifics. So what is this? This is figure 1 from a paper we published in 2004, which is a look at the Boston area biotechnology community in the year 1988. Okay. So here, we coded this data primarily out of industry organizational directories, Bioscan, Recombinant Capital, mostly Bioscan. Nodes are organizations, so that's Tufts University, Dana-Farber, here's Harvard, MIT, BU, right, Massachusetts General Hospital. Triangles are research organizations, squares are venture capital firms, circles are what we call dedicated biotechnology firms. They're small human therapeutic and diagnostic firms focused on essentially genetics and molecular biology for human populations. Ties, I'm not going to go too much into the different colors, but ties are strategic alliances between them. They're licenses to intellectual property, they're collaborative R&D, they're minority equity investments, those are green, right? They're commercialization in clinical trials. What's notable about this, and when I say connections plus organizations, is that what defines the Boston area biotechnology community in this time period is this thing that we call a component. A network component is a cohesive group. You can think of it as if you put your pencil down on any one of these organizations, you can get to any other of them without lifting your pencil by tracing through the network. Right? Traditionally, what people like me do is find that organizations like this one that are more central in the network, that are astride more connections between other organizations, are positioned to innovate more effectively. Right? There's an important caveat here. When you think about regions, we think of them as good things, but the fact of the matter is, in regions like this one, life is hard for biotechnology firms. Firms founded in the Boston area, or in the Silicon Valley area, or in the San Diego area fail at a much higher rate. They innovate, on average, a little bit less. Right? The ones that do very well do very, very well, but in part because of these network mechanisms that create differences among the organizations within a region, you get high levels of productivity from some, low levels from others, problems of, in some of the languages we've talked about, inequity.